The Nebraska Farm Bureau is holding their AgEdge Conference, and so folks are getting the opportunity to get up to date on issues and learn about some of those things that are affecting their bottom line. And when we talk about bottom line in Nebraska is property taxes and what's going on in the Unicameral. And Steve Nelson from Axtell, the president of the Nebraska Farm Bureau, joins us. Steve, you've also this week spent time under the dome, and this first round hasn't been, I guess, maybe the best when we look at some of these proposals of what the response we're getting from senators.
Sure. Well, we've known all along that this wasn't going to be easy, and so I think that's part of what we're seeing here is that these are some complex issues. Our tax system is fairly complex, and so whenever you try to make a change to that, there's always a lot of concern about what effect that change might have. And so I think that's part of the reason that we're seeing the questions, seeing maybe the uneasiness about moving forward here. Some of the questions relate to, are we doing enough? And then, of course, there's some that are concerned that this may be too much of a change at one time. So what we've tried to talk about and tried to really stay on the issue and maybe not to simplify the issues, but maybe to clarify what these kinds of changes really mean. And so yesterday we talked about lowering the valuations on ag land from 75% to 65%. The way we talked about this, a couple ways. First of all, this is one step that we can take. It doesn't create the entire solution. This doesn't mean we'll never talk about taxes again. This is just one step that we can take. Part of the reason that this is an important step is because when you look at surrounding states, the states around Nebraska, all of our competitors, all of our surrounding states value agricultural land at a lower percentage than Nebraska, some significantly lower than Nebraska. So we really need to bring our valuations more in line with our surrounding states just because it's such a disadvantage to our farmers and ranchers, our Nebraska farmers and ranchers. So those are the things on this bill that we really tried to emphasize.
Well, and then kind of this first round, the hearings were yesterday, and the way it was received, I think maybe surprised some, even maybe going to be more of a battle. So I know at this meeting, the call has come out for Farm Bureau members and all of agriculture to let their state senators know how this proposal, the possible proposal of reducing, could help them, but also why it's important.
Well, I think that's, really a good question because, Farm Bureau, we can put together the best testimony that you can come up with. It can touch on every point, every issue that we've heard of, and can explain it in every kind of detail, and I think that's all important. But if you've been to these hearings before, if you haven't, you know that when a farmer or rancher comes up and has his tax statements there and talks about this is what this means to me, that's what the senators really listen to. So those contacts that people can make directly with their senators or senators that they know are extraordinarily important. And so we've been increasing our efforts to help our members do that, and certainly we encourage people who are not Farm Bureau members to do that as well. That contact with your state senator is very important. A couple things I would note, though, that even though that some might describe the hearing yesterday as being somewhat difficult or maybe not the warm welcome that we would like to have, I think it's important to remember that senators are hearing lots of bills this time of year, and I think to a certain extent are waiting till they've heard all of the bills that are out there and then begin to coalesce around certain ideas. So I remain optimistic that we will, once we get past these hearings, and there's some pretty important hearings next week, and then we start to get kind of past the main bills that have been introduced, and I think we will start to see senators coalescing around certain ideas or concepts, and some of those will happen this year, and some of those may be things that we will study and look at, maybe a year or two down the road. But I still remain optimistic, and certainly a piece of that optimism comes from the fact that the governor has built several of these steps, the 75 to 65% valuation change and additional money in the property tax credit program, which is helpful not only to farmers and ranchers but to all property owners in Nebraska. So I see that there's a situation here where I think we can look at maybe pretty positively that we will get something done.
When we talk property tax, it kind of goes hand in hand with school finance. And I know at the annual meeting, one of the things that you put together is a group to look at possible different ways to fund schools that look at the future. We've heard from some folks in the eastern side of the state that say, well, Omaha and Lincoln are going to need a lot more resources, so western Nebraska and greater Nebraska may be kind of on their own. Any comment there as far as we look at keeping rural Nebraska viable?
Well, my first comment would be that I don't think we'll solve the property tax issues that are so concerning to farmers and ranchers and concerning to all property owners really until we look at how we fund schools. Schools are the primary user of property tax dollars, schools and counties. Schools using sometimes 75% of the property tax money that's being paid in. So that's a very important piece of it. I think today we only use property to measure wealth, and so sometimes that gets skewed, and that's really what we've seen here with rapid increases in ag land value. We've seen that formula be skewed against agriculture because the way the formula looks at it, farmers are wealthy because their land is increased in value. Well, farmers and ranchers know that that does not necessarily mean that land has become any more productive. And even a couple years ago when we had high grain prices, that may have been so for a year or two, but today we've had grain prices back off. So that it really tells you that we need to have an income piece to this measurement of wealth, and so that's one of the things we'll talk about. Again, that gets to be a very complicated issue. There's complexities there that are hard to understand, and maybe that's something that we do need to study a little bit. And I know that we need to do that. That's why we've appointed a task force at Nebraska Farm Bureau to be working on the school funding issues. And so I'm hopeful that within a year or two that we can come forward with some proposals that will address that, and really with the idea of bringing a more equitable school funding system to the state of Nebraska and a more equitable tax system to the state of Nebraska.
Number of issues, but do want to talk about this AgEdge Conference, and the focus of the second day is big data, and Farm Bureau has been kind of on the lead of that, of making sure that we understand who owns it, how it can be used, and so on. So really you are on the edge as far as continuing to find experts and those that are using and trying to find answers for agriculture data.
Yeah, that's right. There's of course a lot of interest in all of the new technologies there, and I think that we see the opportunities for additional productivity based on these technological advances, and also cost savings based on the technology that's there. But at the same time, it raises issues. You know, a lot of that data is being put into groups and being shared in certain ways, and so there's concern about, well, what happens to my data when I put it into one of these systems? So Farm Bureau has worked both at the Nebraska Farm Bureau level and then with American Farm Bureau to develop a set of guidelines that our encouragement has been that all manufacturers work with. We've had a lot of the manufacturers and development companies work with us to come up with wording for contracts that really deals with the needs of both sides. And so part of what's being talked about this morning are how all of those pieces come together. It's certainly technology that we want to take advantage of in agriculture, and we want to make the greatest use of in agriculture, but we want to protect the interests of farmers and ranchers, and certainly the development companies have interests there too, and if it weren't for some of those companies, we wouldn't have the technology. So this has got to be a partnership. And so some really great seminars this morning talking about all the different pieces of that.
Steve, thanks a lot, and keep up the good work.
Thank you, Ken.
Steve Nelson, President of the Nebraska Farm Bureau. That's the AgView from the AgEdge Conference in Lincoln. I'm Ken Rogers.